Congressman Michael Burgess at our table, Republican of Texas. He sits on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and he's the top Republican on the Health Subcommittee of that panel. He's also a member of the Rules Committee. Thank you very much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me on, Greta. I appreciate it.
You've probably seen Michael Bloomberg's ads. He's blitzing the airwaves with ads about healthcare. I just want to show our viewers. We'll come back and talk about it.
Soaring health insurance deductibles and medical bills are fueling an affordability crisis.
What's Trump's plan? Repeal Obamacare, threatening coverage for millions of Americans. Mike Bloomberg knows the value of quality health care. A successful entrepreneur, Mike built a business with 20,000 employees, each with great health care and paid leave. As mayor of New York, Mike cut the number of uninsured people by nearly half, expanded health care for working families, and improved care for seniors.
It's time to get real and fix health care. People don't have the health care that they need, and this is America. We can certainly afford to make sure that everybody that needs to see a doctor can see a doctor.
As president, Mike will provide universal access to affordable health care, lower costs by capping health care prices, and expand access to women's health services. And Mike will make sure everyone without health care can get it, and everyone who likes theirs can keep it. How do you know Mike Bloomberg will deliver on health care? Because he's done it before.
Congressman, the president responded in a tweet saying, Mini Mike Bloomberg is spending a lot of money on false advertising. I was the person who saved pre-existing conditions in your health care. You have it now, while at the same time winning the fight to rid you of the expensive, unfair, and very unpopular individual mandate. And if Republicans win in court and take back the House of Representatives, your health care that I have now brought to the best place in many years will become the best ever by far. I will always protect your pre-existing conditions. The Dems will not. This is the Washington Times headline about the president's claims. Trump falsely claims he saved part of Obamacare.
Well, every time the president talks about health care, I mean, the first thing that he says is that he will always protect pre-existing conditions. And I believe him that he will. So what to me as a member of the legislative body, the signal the president is sending to me is that he will not sign anything we send him that does not protect pre-existing conditions.
What about the lawsuit, though, that's underway? Explain what the lawsuit is and where it is right now, because people point to that as, Democrats, I should say, point to that and say, Republicans want to do away with your health care and pre-existing conditions. They support this lawsuit.
Well, first off, it's not the president's lawsuit. It's a lawsuit brought by state attorneys general. Attorney General of my state is one of the participants. And it's to answer a very fundamental legal question. You will recall back in 2012 when the Affordable Care Act challenge went all the way to the Supreme Court, 5 justices on the Supreme Court said that the individual mandate was likely unconstitutional, but Congress had the power to tax, and because of that power to tax, the law could stay as it was. And I think Justice Roberts went a little further and said, don't look to the courts to do things that, I think he was speaking to Congress, don't look to the courts to do things that you should be doing legislatively. So the last thing I want to do is to predict what the Supreme Court will do, because I'm always wrong when I do that. But the same 5 justices that came up with this rather tortuous logic to keep the Affordable Care Act in place are still there. And it would take a leap of faith to say that they are going to reassess their position and come to a different answer. But the removal of the individual mandate, or actually the zeroing out, it's not removed, it's still there. You know what, if the Democrats wanted to moot this lawsuit, they would pass a bill that repealed the individual mandate, and you know what, lawsuit goes away. Or they could pass a provision that says, we forgot to put a severability clause in the Affordable Care Act. We're going back and adding one retroactively. So if any part of the Affordable Care Act is found outside the bounds of the Constitution, the rest of it can stay. I don't know why they never did that in the first place. The version that passed in the House back in whatever that was, 2009, 2010, the version that passed in the House did have a severability clause. Don't know whether it was by design or just an oversight that the Senate version, which is the one that eventually became law, didn't address. They were silent on that issue. Probably didn't make good sense.
This is from the Washington Times. House Republicans approved a bill in 2017, Mr. Trump's first year in office, that would have allowed states to opt out of rules requiring insurers to charge people with pre-existing conditions the same price as healthy people. Mr. Trump celebrated the bill's passage with House Republicans at the White House, though the repeal and replace efforts stalled in the Senate. Is this still the goal of the House GOP?
When that bill passed out of our committee in spring of 2017, it did the principal things that we had been asked to do, which was repeal the taxes, repeal the mandates, soft landing for people on the Medicaid expansion, and to change the subsidy structure to a tax credit structure. All of those things were accomplished in the bill. After it left our committee, it changed, and relying on part of the Affordable Care Act, the part that allows for what are called 1332 waivers, state flexibility plans, that language was added to the bill. But there were additional safeguards, additional guardrails that were provided that any state that opted to do this would have to perform within certain parameters. And one of those was you had to allow a path back in for someone who had allowed their insurance to lapse. Remember, if someone keeps continuous coverage, they're not in any trouble at all. But if they allowed their insurance to lapse, you had to find a way to allow them back in. That's what all of the discussion was. That's what all the more heat than light in the last election cycle. But that was the provision that got all the attention. The parts that came through our committee, and that was a long markup, 28, 29 hours. It was brutal. And then we did it for 18 or 19 more hours in the Rules Committee. So being on both committees, I got to do it twice. But that was pretty solid policy. The provision that added the 1332 waivers may not have been the most judicious. That's why we should do things that go through the committee process and not simply add things on the floor, which we see the other side now doing almost routinely.
We'll go to calls. Stu is up first in Arizona, independent caller.
Thank you, Greta.